My wife and I like old books, but we also like the great outdoors. Sometimes it's good to get away. So when we won this tent in a contest from LL Bean, we made plans to visit Maine, to camp under the stars. The next morning, we marveled at some old stone walls we found in the middle of the forest, signs that this once was farmland. That's common in this part of the country, where land use patterns have changed a lot over centuries. Just before lunch, we were walking near this road, and we came across something that you don't see very often. An old cattle pound from the early 1800s. Pounds like this kept strays, just like dog pounds do today. I know, he's cute. If you were a farmer or had your own vegetable garden, an errant cow was a menace. Imagine a hungry deer, but 4 times heavier. Pounds were built all over New England in colonial and early national times. This one is in the town of Pownell. When men first drove cattle inside these walls, James Monroe was president, the United States invaded Florida, and America had just signed a treaty with Britain that would make the U.S.-Canadian border a demilitarized zone. Let's look again at this cute dog. He's probably thinking a lot of things. But what he or this cat surely don't appreciate is that pounds are one of the oldest legal institutions in history. This dog is the inheritor of over 1,000 years of legal development. Long ago, animal pounds existed not only to protect the community from strays or do a good turn to an owner who had lost a cow. Instead, they were a place where one person could exert force over another person by claim of right. Let's say you believe John Smith owes you money. There are no courts or lawyers or police. What do? You might decide to take the money from him directly by force, but that would potentially spark a feud. So instead, you decide to follow a new idea your neighbors have created for situations just like this, a new tool for settling disputes. You take some of Smith's especially valuable goods and lock them in a neutral location. You seize some of his chattel or cattle and have it held until Smith submits to have your grievance settled by an arbitrator. The neutral place you would take Smith's cattle was the pound. The pound was where force turned into law. And in making that transformation possible, the pound also was a faint, early signal of the potential development of the state. You can draw a historical line from animal enclosures like this to wheel boots like this, with which goods can be impounded not by individuals, but rather in the name of government. Thinking about the cattle pound tucked into the woods of Maine made me think also of another Maine, the legal historian Henry Maine. Here's what he says in one of his books. Let me observe in passing that there is no more ancient institution in the country than the village pound. It is far older than the King's Bench, and probably older than the kingdom. The seizure of cattle, the rescue, and the counter-seizure belong to the oldest practices of mankind. We are carried back to a sudden fight over disputed property barely stopped by a casual passerby. Here, not in a city community, but among the ancient legal forms of a half-pastoral, half-agricultural people, we come upon plain traces of a foray, a genuinely disorderly proceeding which the law steps in to regulate. Some of the earliest interferences of the power which we call the law, the state, or the king, with high-handed violence, consisted neither in wholly forbidding it, nor in assuming active jurisdiction over the quarrel which provoked it, but in limiting it, prescribing forms for it, or turning it to new purposes. Thus, the practice of distraint belongs to a newer range of ideas which dictate the first attempts to moderate reprisals and regulate revenge for wrong. I love that line. A new range of ideas which dictate the first attempts to moderate reprisals and regulate revenge. Later that day, my wife and I walked along Maine's beautiful rocky shore and we admired the state we were exploring. And on our slow drive home, as we peeked into the corners of rural New England, we thought about the traces of history, about how time passes, how everything ends, and yet everything remains.